So it's probably a good time to talk about security planning. I obviously get a lot of emails in the show. Some people asking me about security. People bought maybe a ledger and say, what should I do? Like, people get very, very nervous about using their ledger, say, for the first time. Mm-hmm. And I have it's almost like a copy and paste email now. It's set it up, back up your private key, buy a metal seed storage device, transfer $10 in, wipe it, restore it, check it's still there, then send 10%, send another 15%, and then build up to
That's really one of the most important parts that, I'm kind of disappointed. As far as I'm aware, none of the hardware manufacturers out there say, hey, you should set this all up and then you should wipe it and then you should reload it. Like, that wiping and reloading is one of the most important things. And one of the ways that I think a lot of people lose their coins is they just don't test the recovery. And then the first time they go to test it, they find out something's wrong.
Yeah, they make a mistake writing down the recovery keywords.
Yep.
Yeah, it's the same set of instructions. So I'm kind of looking to you more for your advice. Like, what are the logical steps you would say to somebody brand new to Bitcoin, not technically competent? What would you say the first kind of steps are?
Well, it depends on what value we're talking about, right? If someone's dealing with $10 or $100, then I don't think they really need to put a lot of effort into thinking about security. If it's a trivial amount that you would not really care about losing. The flip side is, I think that whatever amount you do have, you should multiply it by 10, and that should be the amount that you are thinking about needs to be secured, because of course it's a very volatile space, and you can very easily, like you said, go from having $1,000 to $10,000 or whatever, 10x the amount that you had, and your security level is really only appropriate for 1/10 of that. So I see it as, if you're dealing with pocket money, then you're fine just using a software wallet on your mobile phone or your desktop or whatever, because you're probably not going to lose any sleep if something catastrophic happens to that. If you're dealing with a level that is thousands of dollars, if you're talking about a month's wages or more, non-trivial amounts, then you should at least spend $50 or $100 and buy a dedicated hardware device for those private keys.
And look, the hardware devices are, the main players are obvious: Ledger, Trezor, Cold Card, and the main ones. Are there any newer ones and do you support any other ones?
Yeah, there's a lot of newer ones, and it's actually hard to even keep track of them all.
Are there any ones that you as a company rate?
Yeah, so in addition, from Cold Card, based off of the Cold Card platform, there's the Foundation Passport.
Can you look that up?
Mm-hmm. That and I believe it's Kobo. We've started to add some of these devices that support the. It's called the UR 2.0 spec. It's basically animated QR codes for sending the data back and forth. And we really like those. And actually, I think Blockstream Jade just added support for this animated QR code spec. The reason that I like that is that it drastically simplifies the user experience. Like, you don't have these USB cables. You don't have to be plugging stuff in. It's point and shoot. To transfer the data back and forth for the signing operations.
That's a cool looking device.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not cheap though. I think Trezor still has the most economical, but it doesn't have that animated QR code support, so it's a little less user friendly.
Every time I use Trezor, it asks me to install a bridge.
Yeah, basically drivers, so that it can talk to your operating system.
Yeah, I just trust it and install it. But I don't like going via a browser.
Yeah.
I just don't like that. Is Trezor still a browser, or have they got software interface yet?
Well, they have the Trezor suite that I think they rolled out last year.
Okay. Have you seen the new Ledger stacks?
I haven't got my hands on it. I think I said at the time, I was disappointed that they haven't added a camera, and because if they had a camera, they could then have the animated QR code support.
Right, okay.
So my understanding is it's still mostly going to be USB based. Maybe they'll have Bluetooth again, like they did with the Nano X, but I'm not a fan of the Bluetooth stuff either, because I think for most people, just the process you have to go through for pairing Bluetooth stuff is beyond a lot of people's capability.
Yeah.
They do look cool, these though.
They do look cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen them in person. They are very cool. And I don't know, this is me being an aesthetic person. I have multiple wallets for day-to-day things, and just having 3 or 4 of them. I mean, they're not cheap as well, but like having 3 or 4 like that is actually useful. But also, I travel with Bitcoin, not a lot, but I travel with a small amount of Bitcoin just in case I have to do any transactions while we're away. This feels like an easier thing to carry around with me. It feels like something that gets like wallet phone that.
Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, so like, and then when you get into the world of like a meaningful amount of Bitcoin, you're obviously going to recommend multi-sig.
Well, yeah. So when you get to what I would call generational wealth, an amount that is a significant portion of your life savings and that you're probably wanting to hold on to and pass on, that's when you start to want to make sure that you don't have any single points of failure. You don't want one thing to go wrong that could then be catastrophic. So, there's many different ways to eliminate single points of failure. Obviously, we're a big fan of multi-sig because I think that generally makes it easier. Now, multi-sig is more complicated than a single signature wallet. You're dealing with more pieces, you're dealing with more data, but also if you do it right, you can end up with a much more robust setup. But once again, this kind of actually goes back to the discussion with Luke. If you're rolling your own multi-sig setup, you need to be really, really careful about how you do it, because there's many different ways that you can screw it up and still introduce single points of failure. So if you're going to go with multi-sig, then I highly advise using what would be like considered a standard architecture. 2 of 3, 3 of 5, not doing anything crazy with like scripts or derivation paths or whatever. But the big thing is, of course, make sure you can wipe it all and recreate it. And that's what we're definitely going for if we're talking about something that can go through an inheritance process. Like, it needs to be simple, not just for you, but for your non-technical family and heirs.
I think I asked this last time I spoke to you. You've talked then about people rolling their own multi-sig, something I'm never going to do ever in my entire
You've
life.
kind of done it.
Have I?
With Hoddle and Phil Geiger.
When I lost my key.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm never going to do that shit. At the same time, I trust Casa to roll my multi-sig for me. In a scenario where you guys are doing big tech upgrades, how much sleep do you lose when you publish the new code?
Actually, I sleep very well at night because I know that we don't have a threshold of keys that could be used against our customers. Like, even if Casa got completely compromised, then no one's going to lose their money.
Right.
It's the very simple act of each of our clients having to verify their spending operations on hardware and software that Casa has no control over. That's what helps me sleep at night. Now, that creates challenges for us because it means that we have all of these other vendors out there who are changing their software, and we need to keep all of these pieces moving and in play and making sure that there aren't breaking changes, which happen. Like, we actually had one happen a few weeks ago, and thankfully the vendor got it fixed very quickly. But that's part of what you're kind of paying for, is for Casa to be handling all that like technical minutia and make sure that everything's still operating as expected.
Oh, man, I could do it. I would still lose sleep. You mentioned the inheritance plan in there. So on a personal level, that's the one thing I haven't solved in probably the best way possible. Now, look, I know Casa has a plan for that, but just say you can't afford that Casa solution. Maybe it's a bit too high for you, but you do want to make a plan. Do you have personal recommendations for planning? Because like I have some, it puts trust in certain things, which I don't want to explain here.
Sure.
And I've tried to put a scenario in that doesn't put me in a scenario where anything could be stolen, but like in a scenario where something happens, things can be brought together. And maybe when you explain it, it's similar to what I'm doing, but is there like certain recommendations for death planning? Because I mean, didn't that dude, that like old crazy Romanian Bitcoin guy drowned?
Yeah, Mirka.
Yeah, he didn't have inheritance planning set up, supposedly.
That we know of.
That we know of. Yeah.
Did he really drown?
Did he really have Bitcoin? Was he really Romanian? By the way, he was crazy, right?
He was one of the most eccentric figures in the space, for sure.
Who did he death threat? Peter Willett.
Andreas.
Andreas. Didn't he death threat Peter Willett as well?
Yes, and I think that was for SegWit.
Huh. Interesting. Conversation for another day. Okay, so what kind of advice, recommendations would you have for people?
Yeah, so inheritance planning for these bearer assets is a really interesting tightrope to walk, because presumably if you're self-custodying, of course, if you keep all your money with a third party, then you can just give them, inheritance instructions and assume that they'll follow that. But if you're self-custodying, then presumably you want to retain control of your assets as long as you're alive. But then you somehow want this switch to flip when you pass that transitions control to some predetermined entity or set of people or whatever. And of course, this is not something that you can do within the Bitcoin protocol or really any protocol. It's the Oracle problem, right? None of these protocols or blockchains have any understanding of quote unquote real world events. So you have to get other humans involved, humans who are going to be doing things like authenticating your death certificate or whatever proof of death there is. And there's a million different ways to do it. You roll your own setup essentially, and some of them may be more trusted than others. I mean, the very naive thing to do would to be have a trusted friend, family, or attorney, or someone who has like a fiduciary duty to you, and you just give them the keys to the kingdom and pray that they will be honorable and not access anything. The more common thing that we see happen is people create what I would call treasure hunts. Right? Is it you distribute keys, or you distribute different pieces of keys or passwords or whatever all around across different locations, different people, and presumably they will come together and help reconstitute that. And I should know, because that's the type of setup that I had back in the day. And I have a lengthy blog post where I went into describing how I did that, but it was very technical and never actually...
You never actually died.
Well, I never even actually tested it from the sense of like making my executors try to follow my instructions. So I kind of broke one of the cardinal rules there, that it was not well tested, and it very well may not have worked, or it may have been too technical for some of them to understand, because they had to run this like special Shamir secret sharing software, and they had to get the pieces of the decryption keys from different places. But we at Casa, we have a couple different ways that you can do the inheritance, but essentially you're distributing keys so that you retain access and control and custody while you're alive, and then Casa can facilitate essentially verifying proof of death and signing with the Casa key. And then you may involve your attorney or another trusted entity who would have one key and be able to do the same.